Good morning, everybody. We're going on now with Marhi Chotsu, and we are now starting chapter 22. We finished chapter 21 yesterday, and the theme which we talked about yesterday is the fact that when there is a flow from the giver to the receiver, that in order for that to happen, assuming that the receiver, the recipient, is on a lower level in one respect or another, relative to the giver. So therefore, that which is being given over has to go through a process of tzimtzum. And as we defined yesterday, tzimtzum doesn't mean contraction. It means a kind of concealment, okay? And in the case of the process of creation, where the giver, right, is God, or Ein Sof, the light of the infinite, right? And the receiver is the worlds coming into being. So that process of the tzimtzum, the concealment of that divine creative light, has a kind of a bifold, is there such a word? A double process. And of concealment. And that process of concealment is that the original light coming out of the source itself is concealed. What's left over is called the nikudah, the point, that's symbolized by the yud in God's four-letter name, the first letter. And then that itself, that point of light that remains after the process of concealment, which conceals 99.9% of the light. I made that up, that number. So what's left over after that itself goes through a process, that nikudah, that dot, symbolized by the yud, itself goes through a process of internal concealment, and then it can generate into being the next world in the process of creation. Okay, so that's what the theme was we discussed yesterday. Vihine, chapter 22. Bivchinat hitgalut nekuda deyud yesh ba shtei madregot. This aspect of the revelation of the dot, right, the yud in God's name, that also has two elements. Ha'echad kamo shehu bivchinat tzimtzum vehelem v'atzmo adayin. So one of them is with regards to the level of concealment and hiddenness within itself, which still exists. Remember, we talked about the fact that in order for that point of light to become a creative element, which can then bring into existence lower worlds, that there has to be a process of internal concealment as well as the hiddenness of most of the light from the source. So that process of internal concealment, shehu ma shelo yuchal lavo v'hit pashtut hasaga le'orach v'rochav k'vi hatzarich le'mekamlim. And that is a function of the fact that that light cannot be fully fleshed out, right? In order for it to come into the lower worlds, it can't be in this heat pashtut. Remember this term that we talked about in the past, that there's these two modalities. There's the concealment and then the emanation or the spreading out, the expansion, heat pashtut, expansion. So contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, expansion. So it can't be in the an expansive state, and he uses kind of dimensional terms here in terms of length and width, right? Why? That point of creative light can't be expansive, right? Because or else the receiving world can't receive. It has to be in a level which can then bring into being a more finite world. So that process of revelation is only the dot, that creative dot, which is, now he's going to use a metaphor which is related to the metaphor that we've been discussing of the creative process, using the relationship between a teacher and a student, right? As we've been talking about in the past, that when a teacher gives over an idea, chapter 22, when the teacher gives over the idea, if the teacher gives over the idea without a process of concealment and contraction, the recipient will not be able to receive it because it will go, as they say, over their heads, right? For the idea to be able to be received by the recipient, there has to be this process of contraction and concealment. And the way that he describes it here is that when the teacher gives over the idea, so that idea is like a dot, hamavrik b'mocho, which kind of sparkles within his brain. Sort of, barak is a kind of a bolt of lightning. So this is like a little dot of light, which is going to protrude out from the heavens, from the divine heavens of the brain of the teacher, as it were. It's a kind of concentrated dot, which is not on the level of being graspable in the full extent of articulated letters, which can come to full appreciation and perception and understanding, fully fleshed out in dimensionality. He uses these dimensional terms of length and width. Okay, I just want to pause here and use this idea to explain something that I think is an extremely important idea. You see it very much implicit in what we just said. There's a very, very famous story that our sages tell. We just had the holiday of Shavuot, and it is fundamental that in Jewish belief that Kol HaTorah Kula, the entire Torah, Nitna B'Har Sinai, was given at Har Sinai. That's a fundamental infrastructure, foundational, that's a good word people like to use nowadays, foundational belief in Judaism. Not only written Torah, but oral Torah, as Larry just told us. Everything was given at Har Sinai. So our sages tell us this unbelievable story that when Moshe went to receive the Torah, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is writing the Torah, as it were. Obviously, there's a lot of metaphors here. You can't take it literally. And Moshe, I'm going to make this a little facetious just to keep you awake and to keep myself awake. So Moshe says, hey, God, look, I'm on a schedule here. I got places to go, people to see, like what's holding things up? So God says, hey, I'm putting the crowns on the letters. It's a famous story you may have heard before. Putting the crowns on the letters. Don't rush me. You can't rush an artist. I'm putting the crowns on the letters. So Moshe says, hey, you got the letters. What do you need the crowns for? I'm a busy man. CEO of the Jewish people, busy. Got a board of trustees meeting to go to. So what do you need those crowns for? So God says, oh, you know what? The crowns are very important because there's going to come a time when there's going to be a great sage. His name is Rabbi Akiva. And he's going to look at those crowns and see in those crowns mounds and mounds of Torah, mounds and mounds of halachot, of laws from those crowns. So Moshe says, you're kidding. Let me see them. So God says, no problem. Okay, you see those fancy shoes you're wearing? Turn around 3 times, click your heels, and say, there's no place like home. And Moshe does this, and he is miraculously transported into the future, into the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Akiva. Last row. He's sitting in the Beis Medrash. Rabbi Akiva is giving a shiur, giving a class, and he says over a certain halacha, certain law. So someone in the class raises their hand and says, great master, what's the source of this halacha that you're talking about? So at this point, Moshe is like actually having a hard time following the shiur was given in Yiddish. His Yiddish wasn't so good. I'm being facetious, right? He actually was getting confused and upset. Our sages tell us it wasn't clear exactly why. And then someone raises their hand and says, by the way, Rabbi, what's the source of the shiur? He asked Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, oh, this is halacha given to Moshe at Mount Sinai. Moshe's back at the back of the room in disguise, right? So the Gemara says, Nit Yashva Dato. He felt better. Moshe felt better. So the story goes on, but for our purposes, that's the part I want to focus on. Like, I don't really get it. So why was Moshe so upset? Was it because the shiur was given in Yiddish? I don't think so. Right? And then what was it about the fact that when we asked about the source of the halacha, that Rabbi Akiva said, oh, it's law given to Moshe at Mount Sinai. If that was true, then how come Moshe was confused and didn't even know what was going on? And then at the same time, how come he felt better after Rabbi Akiva said, law given to Moshe Sinai, law given to Moshe at Mount Sinai? You would think that Moshe would raise his hand and said, excuse me, Rabbi, I'm Moshe, and I don't know what you're talking about. So what, this law given to Moshe at Mount Sinai? Reality check, fact check, looked it up on Snopes. What's that called? There's a website you can check if something is true. Right. This is like a weird, there's a weird story. And also remember how this is supposed to have something to do with the fact that Moshe wants to understand how Rabbi Akiva, this idea of the crowns of the letters. So I think a straightforward way of understanding that story is telling us something very powerful about that we see right here, right? That the divine light becomes compressed into a dot. It's Tzimtzum. And the image of the Mavrik B'mocho, a concept which is like a little flash of light coming from the mind of the thinker, in this case, maybe a capital T, the divine thinker, and that concept is condensed into the dot, when that dot yet is not yet expanded into width and breadth. I was just trying to abbreviate, say the two words, width and breadth in one word. Why not? You save time. Thursday.
How about breath?
Take a deep breath, Rabbi. Okay.
Shabbat is on its way.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
So it's all compressed into that dot, not yet expanded into dimensionality. Right? That's exactly what that story is in the Gemara. Why? Because that's what the Torah is. The Torah is like that dot. The Torah is like a dot which has everything compressed into that dot. It's all inside there. But you cannot perceive, it's all in there, but you need to just sort of like, I guess maybe the example of like in physics, you know, you have like an atom. And, you know, until you develop certain types of ways of penetrating into the atom and being able to see the different particles or sense their presence, you know, it's all there, but only at certain later stages of history and development are you able to perceive the inner content. Perhaps that's what the Gemara is telling us, that those crowns and letters, there are mounds and mounds of Torah in there. It's all compressed in the dot. It's all compressed in that nikudah, that point hamavrik, which sparkles out from the divine mind. But only over time is the content fleshed out. So now we can understand Moshe. Moshe received the entire Torah at Mount Sinai. Every single thing that anybody in the future will reveal, which is true throughout all of history, was already there. Where was it? In dot. To use this image, the nikudah, or you could say in the crown of the letter. It's all packed in there, but you have to have certain type of technology. We use a kind of a metaphor to be able to reveal its presence. Now, that's why Moshe was upset. It really makes sense now, the story, because Moshe is listening to Rabbi Akiva giving a shiur. He doesn't know what it's about. Doesn't sound like anything that he read about in the Torah, right? So what does he think? You know, if you go to hear a class and somebody is talking about something Jewish, and we know something about what it means Jewish, and you hear someone teach, and you say, that, I never heard of that before. And if someone says something in the name of Judaism that doesn't sound like anything we ever heard before, does not, right? So what do our spiritual antennas, if we're faithful Jews, what do those spiritual antennas tell us? That this is a falsification. This is a distortion because I didn't read that in the Torah, right? I'm getting all upset. Moshe's in the back of the Beit Midrash. Beautiful.
And that's what happened to early Chassidus also.
Yeah.
And
So,
Musar, and Musar.
absolutely. So Moshe's getting upset. Oh my God, I don't recognize this. But then what happens? Someone says, where's this come from? It was the Lugga in Moshe Sinai. Then Moshe says, it was packed into where? It was packed into the crowns on the letters. It was packed into the nikudah. It was packed within that dot. It just needed to be fleshed out. So when Rabbi Akiva says that, in fact, that this is a halakha given to Moshe at Sinai, he's saying that indeed it's all packed in there. And I, Moshe, did receive that nikudah, which will be fleshed out through the learning of Torah sages over time. But I did receive that whole thing in the form of the nikudah. Because Torah cannot be transmitted, or the creative force cannot be transmitted unless it's condensed in that nikudah, and then the content of that nikudah becomes then fleshed out over time. We'll pause here and we'll go on Bezrat Hashem next week.